Hi, this is Grigori Gharveyn, paraphrasing John Lennon. You say you want a revolution, well, you know, we all better free our minds instead. This is part 5 of our current project, Our Future History, How the Earth Made Peace. Part 5, Potentials and Priorities. When our great ancestors, many times removed, first learned techniques to expand their awareness, particularly their consciousness of themselves, they recorded their experiences in their stories and later in their holy scriptures. Our ancestors and their ancestors rediscovered this information in every age of human existence and improved upon it to the very best of their abilities. What was passed down to us today is a treasure beyond measure, a treasure of extraordinary potentials, a treasure written in all of our accumulated works of knowledge, a legacy once the sole domain of our holy scriptures and ancient legends. Many people once speculated regarding what our true human potentials may be. Today, we are beginning to experience those once dimly imagined potentials unfolding, emerging. These potentials are growing stronger and clearer. What has emerged is the certainty that there are no longer any limits for the human race. We have evolved to a level where we are poised to become divine beings. What becomes clearer is that we have always been divine beings. The limits our ancestors faced, limits leading to tyranny, poverty, and injustice, were limits inadvertently conditioned into themselves, limits that our ancestors unwittingly created and maintained for themselves as a result of their maladaptive social conditioning. Many mimetic agencies belonging to various states, militaries, churches, corporations, schools, manufacturers, etc., were responsible for programming and maintaining our ancestors' maladaptive, self-destructive programming. These agencies all served themselves at our ancestors' expense. These agencies often competed with one another very aggressively. Many human lives were often lost or damaged as a consequence of their competitions. Because so much human energy, activity, and productivity were tied up in competitive activities, the greatest part of our ancestors' collective wealth was wasted. One of the most precious resources being wasted was our ancestors' minds. Our ancestors were conditioned to fear. Our ancestors were conditioned to reinforce their fear conditioning by watching television shows that offered them a wide variety of things to learn to fear. Very few television stations offered relief from a steady diet of fear. Perhaps all stations, or nearly all stations, used fear as a tactic to excite their audiences and manipulate them. With everyone's minds consumed by fear, they could not operate at their highest potentials. Human minds under stress respond by shutting down many of their higher cognitive functions to prepare for instinctual fight or flight behaviors. This was a fundamental precept of all brainwashing techniques in use in our ancestors' times. With their higher cognitive functions shut down, people are less able to analyze the information they receive. They use it less effectively. This was great for those people who were in charge of brainwashing large groups of people. It makes their mind control tactics nearly invisible to most other people. Unfortunately, this tactic, which became nearly universal in our ancestors' civilization, may disable the development of human potentials by stifling higher human cognitive abilities. The potentials of the unfettered human mind are enormous, infinite really. However, our ancestors lived lives in which their minds may have been more securely fettered than the minds of any people before in history. One irony of this system of mind control was that the most fettered people of all were conditioned to believe they were free. The potential energy being locked up within each person's mind by their personal conflicts with their own hearts and minds that resulted from their social, cultural, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual domination by various mimetic agencies and their mimetic agents acting within their own subconscious and unconscious minds was enormous. First of all, it takes a lot of mentational resources to store and operate mimetic agencies and their agents in our minds. Then we have to process them in conjunction with each other, where they compete and create dramas in our lives to get our attention. That's a lot of energy. People once learned many different routines that all resulted in making them feel drained, tired, or run down. Many people felt utterly exhausted by the conflicts in their own hearts and minds. Often, there are many different ways to run our routines. We may become inundated with too many possible choices. This inundation consumes more energy. Many people once wound up feeling lethargic and depressed in response to maintaining all of these activities in their heads. These people may have been the lucky ones. Many of them put more time into understanding their unhappiness and learning its true causes. The purpose in overloading people like this is that most people will learn to strip away parts of their minds in order to reduce the load of things demanding their attention. Rather than keep models for several different ways to do something, each of which may have different advantages in different circumstances, many people once preferred to find one routine way to do their tasks. Over time, they habituated themselves to increasingly more limited routines. This reduces their stress, but may make them very inflexible when changes in their routines occurred. This kind of reductive response to stress was a desired product of inducing stress. This kind of reductive response to stress makes people more loyal to their families, brand names, manufacturers, peer groups, schools, religions, nations, and so much more. This kind of reductive response to stress made people better antibodies in the autoimmune systems of their favorite mimetic agencies. It made them better soldiers in their agencies' mimetic warfare games. The mimetic wars raging in our ancestors' minds often spilled real blood on real battlefields. The true potential for peace only emerged when our ancestors learned cognitive strategies to bring their mimetic agents and their agencies under their direct individual control, a control we are still refining today. Along with the new potentials opened up by releasing all the energy once tied up in our ancestors' minds by the warfare of competing mimetic agencies, there came a need to prioritize how these potentials would be used. The path to peace would accelerate its rate of growth over time. But in its early days, the emerging human potentials were often met with suspicion, a common mimetic agency autoimmune response. Time for caution was running out for our ancestors. Several issues were driving an emerging urgency to act. Perhaps chief among these driving forces were two potential threats: the nearly complete collapse of the entire terrestrial and aqueous biospheres, and the threat of global civil war. These two looming threats were driving the urgency that would define our race's emerging priorities. We were coming into possession of the cognitive and social tools we would need only barely in time to avert disaster. Perhaps one of the most confusing issues for our ancestors was that these two emerging threats could not be ignored. It seemed as if both must be addressed simultaneously. Both threats seemed to require immediate action. The solution that emerged was simple. People will, by their natural inclinations, address whichever threat they perceived as more urgent more effectively because they are more motivated. If everyone followed their sense of duty to either one of these two threats, then both would receive more energy than if the people addressed only one threat together. The energy that might have been wasted in competition for the status of their preferred threats would be freed and harnessed directly into finding solutions to their preferred threats. A natural division of labor emerged as people focused on these problems more clearly. Each threat response team was able to support the other because they chose not to compete for resources, but to cooperate in sharing their resources collectively. The synergistic results of their unfettered cooperation helped both teams bring their issues before the public responsibly and effectively. We will present these two threats in greater detail in our next chapters. We will focus on the threat to our global biospheres first, and then deal with the threat of global civil war in context to the threat to the biosphere. These are our highest priorities. Namaste.